I used to think cemeteries were peaceful places. I mean, they kind of are. Quiet, still, and untouched by the chaos of life. That's probably why I took the night shift job as a caretaker at Elderwood Cemetery, a small, centuries-old graveyard just outside Maine. It wasn't much of a place. The iron gates squeaked when you opened them. The gravestones leaned at odd angles, and the forest around it seemed to press in a little closer every year. The pay wasn't great, but I didn't care. I needed silence. After my fiancée Claire died in a car accident the previous winter, silence was all I wanted. My first few nights were uneventful, sweeping pathways, replacing wilted flowers, and keeping drunk teenagers from sneaking in. The groundskeeper before me, old Hank, had left behind a small leather-bound journal. The first few pages were notes about routine maintenance. Keep the south gate locked. Check the chapel roof. Don't feed the foxes. But as the pages went on, his handwriting grew messy, frantic. The last entry was just a single line. If you hear her humming, don't look up. I laughed it off at first. Probably just an old man's superstition. But the more time I spent there, the more I understood what Hank might have meant. It started with the smell. A sweet, rotting scent that drifted through the air only after midnight. Then came the sound. A faint, lilting hum that echoed between the tombstones. It wasn't unpleasant, not at first. It almost sounded like Claire. I remember one night in particular, fog so thick you couldn't see your own feet. I was walking the north side of the cemetery, near the oldest graves. That's when I heard it again. The humming. Soft, distant, familiar. My flashlight flickered, cutting through the fog like a dull knife. The beam landed on a figure standing beside an angel statue. She was wearing what looked like a white dress, her hair falling over her face. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. Claire? I whispered before I could stop myself. She turned her head slowly, but the fog swallowed her face before I could see it. Then, gone. No footprints, no sound, nothing. Just the wind moving through the trees. The next morning I checked the journal again, desperate for answers. The later entries were worse. Drawings of graves, strange symbols, words crossed out and rewritten. Hank had written about a lady of the fog, a spirit who wandered the north section looking for her lover. He claimed she appeared only to those who carried grief too deep to let go. I closed the book unsettled, because deep down, I knew that described me perfectly. The days passed in a daze of coffee and sleeplessness. The humming grew more frequent. Sometimes it followed me from grave to grave. Sometimes I woke up in the caretaker's shack to find muddy footprints on the floor. Small, bare, and wet, like someone had been standing over me. I told myself I was imagining things, that my brain was just trying to fill the empty space where Claire used to be. But one night, I realized it wasn't in my head. The security cameras caught it. I had installed them after a group of vandals broke in. I checked the feed one morning and froze. At exactly 2:14 a.m., a woman appeared on the north side, moving through the fog. She didn't walk, she drifted. Her face wasn't visible, but her shadow fell long and wrong, stretching in directions it shouldn't. When I played the clip again, I noticed something else. Behind her, carved faintly into the soil, was a single word. Stay. I tried to quit. Packed my bags that afternoon and drove toward town, but the road twisted in ways it never had before. Every turn brought me back to the same gate, the same crooked sign that said Elderwood Cemetery. I left my truck running and stumbled out, heart hammering. The fog was already rolling in, thicker than ever. The humming started again, closer this time, circling me. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a faint light flickering inside the small stone chapel near the center of the cemetery. I hadn't opened that place since I started. The door was chained shut, or at least, it had been. The lock now dangled, broken. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door open. The smell of earth and mildew hit me instantly. Inside, the air was heavy, almost wet, and in the center of the chapel stood a mirror, old, cracked, covered in dust. Something in me said, "Don't look," but I did. At first, I saw only my reflection, tired eyes, dirty uniform, trembling hands. Then Claire's face appeared over my shoulder. She was smiling just like she used to. I spun around, but no one was there. When I looked back, the reflection was still smiling. But now it wasn't me. It was her. Only, her eyes were black, and her smile didn't stop. I stumbled backward, falling against the pews. The humming filled the chapel, louder now, vibrating in my skull. The walls seemed to breathe. The mirror began to shimmer, and I saw movement. Shapes behind Claire, graves shifting, something crawling beneath the soil. Then her voice, clear as day, whispered, "You shouldn't have stayed." The mirror cracked. A piece fell to the floor, slicing my arm. I bolted out of there, bleeding, gasping, barely able to see through the fog. But the cemetery had changed. The paths twisted, the headstones rearranged themselves. Every direction led me back to the chapel, and with every step I heard footsteps behind me, slow, dragging, deliberate. I finally reached the caretaker's shack and slammed the door shut. My flashlight flickered again. I turned toward the small table where the journal sat open. The last page had changed. New handwriting, not Hank's, not mine. It read, "The new caretaker knows her name now." That's when the humming stopped. Complete silence. I thought maybe it was over. But then I noticed the dirt under the door. It was moving like something was pushing up from beneath the shack. I backed away, my breath catching. A pale hand broke through the floorboards, then another. And then I saw her face rise from the dirt. Claire's face, but drained of all color, her mouth filled with soil. She reached toward me, whispering, "Stay." I screamed and swung my flashlight. The light shattered, and the world went black. The next thing I remember is waking up in my truck parked miles away from the cemetery. It was daylight. My arm was bandaged, though I don't remember doing it. On the passenger seat lay Hank's journal, open to the first page. Only this time there was a new line written under the last entry. "If you're reading this, you're the caretaker now." I've tried to tell myself it was all a dream, that I lost my mind for a few days. But sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet and I start to drift off, I swear I can still hear that humming. It comes from the corner of my room, soft and patient, like she's waiting for me to open my eyes. I've always been fascinated by old cemeteries. There's something strangely peaceful about them, the kind of silence you don't find anywhere else. So when my photography professor assigned a project on forgotten places, I immediately thought of Willow Creek Cemetery, a 19th century graveyard just outside Savannah, Georgia. It had been abandoned for decades, overrun by vines, with cracked stones leaning like crooked teeth under the mossy oak trees. Locals said it was haunted, but I figured that was just southern folklore, small-town ghost stories to scare kids. I wish I had never gone there alone that night. It was early autumn, and the air smelled like rain and soil. I reached the cemetery just before dusk, hauling my camera, tripod, and flashlight. The gate was rusted, half open, the hinges groaning as I pushed through. Beyond it, a long dirt path wound between the graves, disappearing into the fog that clung to the ground. I set up my tripod near a large weeping willow, its branches hanging low like a curtain. The place was beautiful in a broken way. But even as I admired it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it. A faint whisper, soft as breath. I froze. It wasn't words, just a low murmur that seemed to move with the fog. I shined my flashlight toward the willow, but the beam was swallowed by darkness. I told myself it was just the wind brushing through the branches. But then I heard my name, clear as day. "Ethan." I spun around, the light shaking in my hand. No one. Just rows of crooked headstones staring back at me. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out the crickets. I laughed nervously and muttered, "Great, I'm hearing things now." I packed up my camera and started back toward the gate. That's when I saw it, a figure standing behind one of the larger monuments. It was tall, unmoving, its outline barely visible through the mist. "Hey," I called out. No answer. I took a cautious step closer, flashlight trembling. The beam landed on the stone, empty. No figure, just a headstone so old the name had worn away. But the air had changed, colder, thicker, like the cemetery itself was holding its breath. And then, from somewhere deep in the fog, came that whisper again. Louder this time. Not one voice, many. Whispering in unison, low and rhythmic, like a chant. I bolted. My boots slipped on the damp leaves as I ran toward the gate, but it wasn't where I'd left it. Every turn brought me deeper into the graveyard, as if the paths had rearranged themselves. I tried to use my phone's GPS. No signal. I called out for help until my throat burned, but the whispers only grew louder, circling me, closing in. Finally, I saw a faint light flickering through the fog. I followed it, desperate, hoping it was the road or a nearby house. But when I got closer, I realized it was coming from a lantern hanging in front of a small stone mausoleum. The door was slightly open, and from inside came that whispering sound, softer now, coaxing me forward. Every part of me screamed to run, but curiosity, that stupid, dangerous curiosity, made me step inside. The air was damp and freezing. My breath came out in white clouds. The walls were lined with nameplates, most too faded to read. The whispers had stopped. The silence was so thick it felt like the air itself was listening. I turned to leave, but the door had shut behind me. I pulled at it, but it wouldn't budge. Then I noticed something strange. The lantern flame wasn't flickering. It was burning still, as if the air around it wasn't moving at all. And then, the whisper came again right behind me. "Help us." I turned slowly, and that's when I saw them. Faint figures, half-formed in the darkness, drifting between the tombs. Their faces were pale, eyes hollow, mouths moving silently. One of them stepped closer, a woman in a tattered dress. Her voice was a dry rasp. "You hear us, don't you?" I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched my shoulder. It was cold, colder than death itself. "Tell them," she whispered. "Tell them what they did." What do you mean?" I stammered. But she was already fading. The others began to wail, a chorus of anguish that shook the air. The lantern shattered, plunging everything into darkness. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears as the sound tore through me. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, I was outside again, lying in the mud. Dawn had broken. My camera bag was beside me, though I didn't remember grabbing it. I stood shakily and looked back toward the cemetery. The gate was now closed, sealed with a heavy chain that hadn't been there before. My hands were shaking as I drove home. I told myself I'd hallucinated it all. The fog, the whispers, the woman. Until I checked my camera. The photos were mostly black, the fog too thick to capture anything. But in the last image taken inside the mausoleum, there was something. Dozens of faces, pale, distorted, pressed against the darkness as if trying to break through the screen. I threw the camera into a drawer and tried to forget. A week later, I got a call from a local historian I'd contacted for my project. I asked him about Willow Creek Cemetery. He hesitated before speaking. "That place," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have gone there, son. That land was used as a mass burial site back in 1882. Whole families from the flood. But the thing is, the records show the town council tried to build over it years later, paved a road right through the graves. The bodies were never moved." My blood ran cold. "So the cemetery wasn't abandoned," he finished. "It was erased." That night I dreamed of the woman again. Only this time she wasn't whispering. She was screaming, and behind her stood hundreds of shadowy figures reaching toward me. I woke up drenched in sweat, the sound of whispers still echoing in my ears. I tried to destroy the camera, but no matter what I did, smashing it, burning the SD card, the files always came back. Every night a new folder appeared on my laptop. Willow Creek. Each one had a timestamp from that same night, and every photo showed the same thing. More faces. Closer now, clearer. The last image, the one that appeared yesterday, wasn't of the cemetery at all. It was my bedroom, and in the reflection of my mirror, I could see them standing behind me, watching, waiting, whispering. Sometimes, late at night, when the world falls quiet, I can hear them again, faint, pleading, buried somewhere beneath the sound of the wind. Tell them what they did. I think I finally understand. They don't want to hurt me. They just want to be remembered. But the more I listen, the harder it becomes to tell their voices apart from my own. And last night, I caught myself whispering back. When I first took the night security job at Hollow Pines Memorial Cemetery, I thought it would be easy money. Sit in a booth, check the cameras, do a few patrols, and that's it. I was 27, broke, and desperate for work after losing my job at a hardware store in Ohio. The ad said the position paid double the usual rate for night hours, which should have been my first red flag. But at the time, I didn't care. I needed the paycheck, and the cemetery seemed harmless enough. Just rows of stone and silence. The first few nights were uneventful. I brought coffee, listened to old radio shows, and walked the perimeter once an hour with my flashlight. The place stretched over several acres with thick woods on the west side and a single narrow road leading in. In the center stood a small chapel locked up years ago. The headstones dated back to the early 1800s, names long forgotten, their stories erased by time and moss. The only strange thing was the north section, which everyone at the office called the Hill. The hill was where the oldest graves lay, so old the stones were crumbling like chalk. My supervisor, Marty, told me to avoid it. "Ground's unstable up there," he'd said. "You step wrong, you might end up 6 feet under yourself." He laughed, but his eyes didn't. There was something in his tone, a mix of fear and respect, like he was talking about a living thing. On my fourth night, around 2:30 a.m., the motion sensor on camera 4 triggered. That was the hill. I sighed, thinking it was probably a raccoon. Still, I had to check. I grabbed my flashlight, radio, and jacket and started the slow walk up the path. The air was colder there, heavy and damp. The wind seemed to stop completely as I reached the top. My flashlight beam flickered across crooked stones, some broken, others half swallowed by dirt. And then I saw it. A fresh mound of soil, right in the center of the old section. That didn't make sense. There hadn't been any new burials in the hill for decades. I checked the records myself. Still, the dirt looked newly turned, loose and dark. I knelt beside it, frowning, when I noticed something else. A small wooden cross, roughly made, no name on it. Just one word burned into the surface: "Forgive." A chill ran through me. I told myself it was some teenager's prank and radioed Marty. "Hey, someone's been digging up here. You know anything about a new grave on the hill?" Static. Then his voice, sharp and low. "Get out of there. Now." "What? Why?" "Just don't stay up there after midnight. I'll explain later." The radio crackled, then died. I stared at the mound one last time and started back down the path, but the woods had gone dead silent. No wind, no crickets, nothing. The air felt charged like the moment before a storm. Then faintly, from behind me, I heard a whisper. "Don't leave me here." I spun around, flashlight shaking. Nobody. Just the mound of soil. The whisper came again, this time closer, breathy and raw. "Please." My throat went dry. I backed away, tripping on a root, and the flashlight rolled from my hand. The beam landed on something half buried at the edge of the grave. A shovel. The handle was old, cracked, and stained dark near the blade. I picked it up without thinking and noticed letters carved into the wood. Same handwriting as the cross. Forgive. I didn't sleep that morning. When Marty showed up, I demanded answers. He looked pale, exhausted. Finally, he sighed and said, "You weren't supposed to see that." He told me that years ago, before he started working there, the hill had been used for something else, something not in the official records. Back in 1952, the town was hit by a strange illness. Dozens of people died in a week. They said it was an epidemic, but the truth was darker. The hospital ran out of space, and the townspeople buried the bodies in mass graves, unmarked, forgotten. When the cemetery expanded years later, they built right over them. "That mound you found," Marty said quietly, "it's not new. The ground just gives sometimes, like it remembers." I didn't believe him, but I stopped going near the hill after that. Until one night, about a week later, the alarms went off again. Motion detected. Same place, same time. My gut twisted, but duty called. I climbed the path, flashlight tight in my grip. The mound was open this time. The soil was disturbed, the wooden cross broken. My stomach dropped when I saw a hand sticking out of the dirt. It wasn't skeletal. It looked fresh, pale, with dirt under the fingernails. I stumbled backward, almost vomiting. Before I could radio for help, the hand twitched. Just a small movement, but real. My body froze. Then another finger moved, curling slightly toward me. I ran. I didn't look back until I reached the main gate. I locked myself in the booth and sat there shaking until dawn. When Marty arrived, I dragged him up the hill, but when we got there, the grave was sealed again. Smooth, untouched. No hand, no cross, no sign of digging. He stared at me with pity and said, "You've been here too long, kid. The hill gets in your head." I thought maybe he was right. Maybe sleep deprivation was making me hallucinate. But that night, when I checked the security feed, my blood froze. On the monitor, I saw myself, standing by the grave, just like before. Only there was someone else beside me. A tall figure in black, face hidden under a hood. It stood perfectly still as I turned and ran. Then, after I was gone, it looked directly into the camera. The feed glitched, and when it came back, the figure was gone. After that, things escalated fast. Doors in the caretaker's office would open on their own. The radio crackled with voices whispering my name. One night, I woke up from a nap to find dirt under my fingernails and footprints leading from the door straight to my bed. I wanted to quit, but something held me there. A strange pull, like I owed the place something. A few nights later, I went back to the hill one last time. The fog was thick, swallowing the light of my flashlight. When I reached the top, I found several fresh mounds, not just one. Each had a cross marked with that same word, forgive. The whispers surrounded me, hundreds of them, rising and falling like wind through leaves. Then, from behind one of the graves, someone stepped forward. It was Marty, or what used to be him. His face was gray, eyes hollow, mouth twisted in a silent plea. "You stayed too long," he rasped. "Now you dig." Before I could move, the ground beneath me split open. Hands, dozens of them, reached up, grabbing my legs, pulling me down into the earth. I screamed until my throat tore, but the soil kept closing over me. The last thing I saw before the world went dark was the broken shovel lying beside the grave, waiting. When I woke, I was in the security booth again, covered in dirt, my uniform soaked through with mud. The cameras were static. The clocks were stopped at 2:33 a.m., and sitting on the desk in front of me was a small wooden cross, burned into it in rough letters. Forgive. That was 3 nights ago. I haven't left the booth since. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the scraping of shovels outside. And sometimes when the fog gets thick, I swear I can see Marty standing on the hill, watching me. I think he's waiting. And last night, I heard a voice whisper right by the window. The same one from before, soft and pleading. Don't leave me here. So tonight I'm taking the shovel. Maybe I'll dig. Maybe I'll finally see what's really under that hill. And maybe I won't come back. I moved to Vermont after my divorce, hoping to start fresh. I bought a small, rundown house on the outskirts of a quiet town called Hollow Creek, a place so small it didn't even have a stoplight. My closest neighbor was nearly a mile away, and the only landmark nearby was a cemetery just behind my backyard. I didn't think much of it when I moved in. Cemeteries never scared me. To me, they were just places where stories ended. I had no idea I was about to become part of one. The realtor never mentioned that the Hollow Creek Cemetery was over 200 years old, or that half the graves didn't even have names. The first few weeks were peaceful. I'd sit on my porch in the evenings with a cup of coffee, watching the mist roll in from the trees. At night, the place was eerily beautiful, moonlight reflecting off marble stones, the occasional hoot of an owl echoing through the pines. It almost felt comforting. Then came the voices. The first time I heard them, I thought it was the wind. A low murmur just outside my window around 3 a.m. It sounded like a conversation, soft, distant, impossible to make out. I opened the curtain, but there was nothing. Just the cemetery, bathed in pale moonlight. I tried to go back to sleep, convincing myself it was my imagination. But the next night, it happened again. Clearer this time. I could hear distinct words, but they didn't sound like any language I knew. A whispering chorus weaving through the night air. One evening, I decided to record it. I placed my phone on the windowsill, hit record, and waited. The whispering began again, faint at first, then louder, closer. It felt like someone was standing just beyond the glass. My chest tightened. I didn't look. I couldn't. When I finally stopped the recording and played it back the next morning, the sound was unmistakable. Not wind, not animals. Voices. And beneath the whispers, faint but clear, someone said my name. After that, I started to notice other things. The air in the house always felt cold, no matter how high I turned up the heat. The lights flickered at exactly 3:07 every night. My cat Luna refused to go near the back door. She'd hiss and arch her back whenever the wind blew from the cemetery's direction. One night I found her hiding under the bed, trembling, her fur bristling. I decided to visit the local library to learn more about the cemetery. The librarian, a kind old woman named Margaret, hesitated when I asked. "You live by Hollow Creek?" she said, her voice dropping. "That place has history." She told me the cemetery used to belong to a church that burned down in 1889. Dozens of people died inside. The pastor, his family, the congregation. Some were buried in the field behind the ruins, but not all the bodies were found. Locals say the fire wasn't an accident, Margaret whispered. They say it was a ritual gone wrong. I laughed it off. Rituals, curses, that was just folklore. Until I found something buried in my own backyard. I was planting new soil near the fence line when my shovel hit something solid. I brushed the dirt away and uncovered a small wooden box, blackened with age. Inside was a lock of hair, a tiny silver cross, and a scrap of paper so faded it was barely legible. I held it up to the light and read the words scrawled in old ink. The bell must never ring again. I didn't understand what it meant until the next night. At exactly 3:07 a.m., I woke to a faint sound echoing from the cemetery. A bell. Slow, hollow, metallic. One ring every few seconds. My blood ran cold. There was no church left, just graves and weeds. I went to the window and saw movement near the far end of the cemetery. A shadow hunched and crawling, dragging something metallic behind it. My phone camera wouldn't focus. The fog was too thick. But I swear I saw a glint of light, like a hand swinging a small bell. I didn't sleep at all. When the sun rose, I went out there. The grass was wet with dew, and my boots sank into the soft earth. At the far corner, I found a cracked stone slab, half buried and tilted. There was a rusted handbell lying beside it. I reached down, and as soon as I touched it, the air seemed to shift. The wind stopped. Everything went silent. I don't know why I did it. Maybe curiosity, maybe something else. But I lifted the bell. The sound that came out wasn't like any bell I'd ever heard. It was deep, almost human, like a moan pulled from the ground itself. My vision blurred. The trees swayed violently, though there was no wind. And for a split second, I saw them. People standing between the graves. Dozens of them, blackened, burned, their eyes hollow, their mouths open as if screaming without sound. I dropped the bell and ran. When I reached my porch, the air was still again. But something had changed. The whispering that night didn't come from outside. It came from inside the house. It started in the walls. A faint rustle, then a voice, closer, calling my name again and again. My lights flickered, and the air filled with the smell of smoke. I could hear the faint crackle of fire, though there was none. Then I heard footsteps, soft, dragging footsteps across the floorboards. I grabbed my phone to call someone, anyone, but when I looked at the screen, it was already recording. The timestamp read 3:07 a.m. The camera pointed toward the hallway, and through the viewfinder, I saw something that wasn't visible to my eyes. A tall, dark silhouette standing at the end of the hall. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there. The video cut out, and when I checked again, it was gone. The next morning, I went to see Margaret at the library. She looked terrified when she saw me. "You touched it, didn't you?" she whispered. "The bell." She told me the legend. The church that burned down had a bell that was rung to summon the congregation. But on the night of the fire, the pastor had used it for something else, a ritual to raise the faithful after death. The fire consumed them all. The townspeople buried what was left and swore to silence the bell forever. "It's said," Margaret whispered, "that anyone who rings it invites them back." I wanted to believe it was all superstition, but the proof was in my recordings. Every night, new files appeared on my phone. Audio files, all time-stamped at 3:07 a.m. Each one containing faint voices whispering the same words over and over. "Ring again, ring again, ring again." I deleted them all, but they kept returning. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I started seeing shapes move in the corners of my eyes. Charred faces, watching, waiting. 3 nights ago, the whispering stopped. For the first time in weeks, silence filled the house. I almost cried with relief. But then I heard a single chime. The bell. Just once. Clear as day. I went outside, trembling, and saw the bell lying on my porch. It wasn't rusted anymore. It looked new, polished, waiting. That was 3 nights ago. Last night I heard the whisper again. Just one voice this time, close enough to feel its breath. Tonight the bell must ring again. And now as I write this, the air smells like smoke. My cat is gone. My lights won't stop flickering. I can hear footsteps outside my door, and in the distance, faint but growing louder, the bell is ringing. It was the autumn of 1984 when the people of Marrow's End started noticing something strange about their old cemetery. Graves that had been sealed for decades appeared freshly disturbed. The soil would be turned over, the grass torn away, and in the pale moonlight, you could see faint boot prints leading away from the site, always ending at the same place, the caretaker's shack. The caretaker's name was Elias Crane, a man in his late 60s with hands like worn leather and a stare that could freeze your blood. He had worked at the cemetery for more than 40 years. No one knew much about him, not where he came from, not whether he had family, but everyone knew his routine. Every morning, before the sun rose, Elias would walk the entire graveyard, his lantern swinging in slow rhythm. And every night, long after everyone else had gone home, a faint light would glow in his shack until dawn. Some said Elias spoke to the dead. Others whispered that he listened to them. When I moved to Marrow's End to write a book about forgotten towns, I thought the stories were nothing but local folklore, creepy bedtime tales meant to scare kids away from the graveyard. But curiosity has always been my curse. So one foggy evening, I decided to meet Elias Crane myself. The cemetery was nothing like I expected. It wasn't peaceful or quiet. It felt heavy, as if the air itself was pressing against my chest. The fog hung low over the gravestones, and the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves filled the air. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the soft scrape of a shovel. That's when I saw him. Elias stood over an open grave, his lantern flickering beside him, his shovel digging with slow, steady strokes. He didn't look up when I approached. "Evening?" I said, trying to sound casual. He paused, then turned his head slightly, his eyes catching the light, pale gray, almost silver. "Evening," he muttered. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. "Someone pass away recently?" I asked, gesturing to the open pit. He gave a faint smile, a grim one. "No, no one knew." That sentence made my skin crawl. "Then why are you digging?" He wiped his brow, looked down into the grave, and said softly, "Sometimes they don't stay down." I thought he was joking, but his expression didn't change. He leaned on his shovel, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "They whisper to me," he said. "All of them. Some just want to talk, but others want more." That was my first conversation with Elias Crane, and it was enough to haunt me for weeks. I started visiting him often under the pretense of gathering stories for my book. The truth? I was obsessed. Every time I asked about the graves, he'd tell me something stranger. "They're restless," he'd say. "They remember things, sins, promises." One night, curiosity pushed me too far. I asked him directly, "What do they say to you, Elias?" He looked at me with those hollow gray eyes and whispered, "They ask me to let them out." That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard a sound coming from outside my rented cottage, a faint ringing, like metal striking stone. I opened the window, and in the distance, near the cemetery, I saw a lantern light moving slowly between the graves. I knew it was him. The next morning, I went back. The grave he had been digging the previous night was now filled, freshly covered, the soil still damp. But what chilled me wasn't the new mound. It was the name on the headstone, Elias Crane. I froze. I had seen him last night, alive, digging. Yet here was his grave, marked, dated, complete. My heart pounded as I stumbled toward his shack. The door creaked open and a foul smell hit me, the stench of old decay. Inside, the room was cluttered with lanterns, rusted tools, and something else. Small jars lined up on a shelf, each containing something dark floating in cloudy liquid. I stepped closer and realized what they were. Human eyes. Some were old and shriveled, some looked disturbingly fresh. Every jar was labeled with a name, and one of them had mine. I stumbled back, knocking over the lantern on his table. It rolled across the floor and came to rest at the base of a trapdoor. My curiosity overpowered my fear. I opened it. The smell of earth and rot rose up from the darkness below. A narrow wooden ladder led down into what looked like a tunnel. I climbed down slowly, the lantern light trembling in my hand. The tunnel was long and lined with stone. As I walked, I began to see them. Figures pressed against the walls, their faces twisted in silent agony. They weren't statues. They were bodies. Mummified, preserved somehow, standing upright as if buried alive. One of them moved. The sound it made was a soft, wet gasp, followed by a faint whisper. "Help. Me." I dropped the lantern and scrambled backward. The flame flickered wildly, illuminating dozens of faces, some decomposed, others frozen mid-scream. My mind screamed for me to run, but before I could climb out, a shadow appeared at the top of the ladder. Elias Crane. "You weren't supposed to see this," he said calmly. His voice echoed through the tunnel. I could barely breathe. What are they?" I stammered. He stepped down one rung, then another. They were the ones who couldn't rest, the ones who wouldn't stop calling. So I gave them a place to stay. I backed away as he descended, the dim light flickering across his face. For a moment I saw something impossible. His skin seemed to ripple, like something was moving beneath it. His eyes glowed faintly, the same pale gray as the fog that hung over the cemetery. "They feed on memory," he whispered, "and you've given them yours." I turned and ran through the tunnel, my hands scraping against the stone walls. The air grew colder with every step until I burst through a wooden door and stumbled into the night. I didn't stop running until I reached the road. When I returned the next morning with the sheriff, the shack was gone. Not destroyed. Gone. The ground where it stood was covered in untouched grass. The tunnel entrance was nowhere to be found. Only the headstone remained, with the name Elias Crane carved deep into it. I left Marrow's End that same day, but even now, decades later, I still dream about that cemetery. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I can hear the faint sound of a shovel scraping the earth outside my window. And sometimes, just before dawn, I hear a voice whisper my name.